kind of makes me feel sick that I'm going to say this, but it is a bit of a romp. Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah and I love to talk about books. And between my the last video that I did in 2021 and the end of the year, I was in a bit of a reading slump and I was struggling, I was struggling with mental health, and I wasn't reading as much as I would usually do, but I did somehow manage to read 10 books, and I thought, to get myself back up to date, and because I haven't discussed them on here yet, I thought I would do a bit of a wrap up of the end of 2021. Now that I'm back, it's time to play a bit of catch up. So I'm going to talk about these in the order that I read them, basically. In October, and probably helped by Dewey's 24-hour readathon, I managed 3 books. The first was Waiting for the Waters to Rise by Maryse Conde, and this was a book that I got from the publishers via NetGalley in return for a review. And I think what drew me to give this book a try was the mention of Haiti, because I've not, I don't think I've read a book set in that country before, and I don't actually know very much about it. Well, and obviously because the premise of the book sounded quite intriguing, because a doctor who's originally from Africa, his name is Babacar, and he's basically left holding the baby when a woman dies in childbirth. He takes it upon himself to take that baby, but he also takes it upon himself to return that baby to her mother's country of origin, which is Haiti, and to try, I think it's to reunite her with her family. It might just be so she can meet her family. On the kind of Haiti front, I think this book really delivered. I got to understand a lot more about the power struggles, the international aid or interference that has happened in that country, and the I think there's like a climate change aspect as well, and I think they're all discussed as the story unfolds. But this book isn't only set in Haiti, because it takes you to other countries. So yeah, it takes you to other countries. So while the majority or all of like kind of the second half of the book is set in Haiti, we travel through quite a lot of other countries on the way there, and in the process of that, some quite thought-provoking parts on the nature of belonging, of home, of being displaced, and what makes somewhere like a homeland or a motherland. And this isn't only done through Babacar, who is the main focus of the story, but he also has some other companions on the way. So in Haiti, he meets a Palestinian man, so we look at his thoughts on those topics, and also a Haitian man who had fled to Guadeloupe and had been accompanying the mother of the baby that Babacar is trying to return. And I was quite glad that we got into those other characters' stories, because I didn't really like Babacar, and also I kind of felt like the story of returning that baby, and that's why I can't really remember what the point of it is that it does kind of get lost in all that other context though, and that's the same for like women in general in the book. They kind of come across as a bit of a plot device through which to link the stories of the men together, so I wasn't a huge fan of that aspect, and so I kind of felt and because I didn't have that warmth or whatever for Babacar, this book just didn't touch me quite in the way that I had hoped it would. Like, it's a solid book, it's readable, the writing's really good, but what is it really good? I can't remember, it's been that long since I read it, but I didn't connect with it particularly deeply, so a bit of a fair to middling one, that for me. Then I went on and read a non-fiction, which I have here, and it was Chris Bambery's A People's History of Scotland, and I had picked this up wanting basically to know more of the history of my own country, because we didn't get an awful lot of it at school. Maybe that's because I only moved to Scotland when I was 14, so maybe I'd missed that. But I only really remember getting the Highland clearances in school, which I'm now fascinated by, but not a lot else. So the reason I picked this book over like other Scottish history books is I'm much more interested in the history of people, like the social history, and how the political or ruling landscape, I guess, impacted the majority than I am in reading about the lives of the royals or the rich and titled. And I felt that this book satisfied on that front. Possibly not as much as I was hoping, I think. So the early chapters, which this book takes like a chronological approach. So the early chapters deal with Scotland in its infancy up to the time of the clans, and it's probably, I'm not very smart when it comes to things like this, but I found them quite a struggle. I don't have any background knowledge, so I felt it was a bit difficult at the time to get place names and people's names and dates and all that stuff. I'd get a toehold in all of that, and then I would kind of get a bit, and then I would lose my grip after a couple of pages because a lot goes on, and this isn't a big book in which to fit it all in, particularly like it's not even as long as that because there's like loads of references and stuff as well. So it's actually quite a short book to put the whole history of the country into. But I far more enjoyed the chapters on more modern history, particularly the independence debate, and I enjoyed the touch of highlighting specific figures or figureheads as well. He would do little sections specific on those people. The role of women and the socialist movement were particularly interesting to me, but it does get a bit bogged down in the coverage of, you know, years where there was a lot of strikes because they, you know, the labour movement was taking hold. But at that point I kind of wondered if chronological was the best way to tell the history, because it became quite repetitive and hard to concentrate when it was strike after strike after strike. So maybe like a topic by topic approach would have been a bit better, because there is so much information in this book that, you know, there is no way I'm ever going to retain it. That's my flaw, not books. But on the whole, I'm very glad that I read it, and I will keep it on my shelves to return to when I need to. And then I went on to a memoir, Anne Theroux's The Year of the End, which I again got as a NetGalley. And Anne Theroux was the wife of the writer Paul Theroux. She's also the mother of the lovely Louis. And in the year that their Anne and Paul's marriage fell apart, she kept a record. So it's kind of part diary of what she was up to, what she was doing for work and things like that, and then also a part journal where she noted her feelings or mulled things over as well. And so in this memoir she uses that diary or journal to reflect on life with her husband, what it was like as their marriage was ending, and I think a little bit about how her life has been since. And since being, you know, badly burned by the end of my own marriage, I've been on a search for a woman who can put into words better than I can certain aspects of that experience, which I know kind of is like the search for the Holy Grail, because obviously everyone's experiences are different, everyone's experiences of their experiences are different. So, you know, I don't know if I'll ever find what I'm looking for, but parts of this one I kind of got a bit of recognition, or something chimed with me, particularly on being on the receiving end of betrayal, and I got quite excited. But there is, I find this a lot in people that get their memoirs published, there's an immense privilege inherent in her lifestyle, and she also has her own acts of infidelity. So that kind of dampened it down, that excitement and recognition I was feeling quite a bit. But what I did enjoy about this memoir is kind of also linked to those two aspects, because Anne's life is really, really interesting. You know, before she met Paul, during their marriage, and then, you know, as the marriage has fallen apart, she still has a really interesting life, and she's really honest about her own faults as well as those of her husband. And so combined, I think that makes for quite a compelling, you know, it's also very sad to read. And it's brave to put those details out there, and that's no doubt why she's left quite a long period of time between when the marriage ended and when she's published this memoir. And probably those years have helped her be maybe less critical of her husband and more critical of herself to kind of balance things out. But both the approach in the format of the writing and the writing style drew me in. Sorry, Hamish is saying hello. Drew me in and kept me reading, and there was just something about this that I felt was quite, I was going to say special, that's probably not the right word, but it struck a note with me. And then we move on to November, which I read 4 books during November, which I started with the wonderful Evie Wyld's The Bastrock. And I loved this book right from the start. You know, it's 3 women, 3 different timelines, 3 interwoven stories, and it's set in Scotland. I mean, how was I not going to love it? So it's set in North Berwick, which is on the east coast of Scotland, and it's overlooked by this. It's quite a weird thing. I've never seen it in person, but I've seen pictures online. It's called the Bastrock, and it's this massive chunk of rock out in the sea that kind of overlooks the coastline, and that coastline is where most of the storylines play out. In the present day, we have, I think she's in her 40s. She's called Vivian. She's from London, or somewhere south England. I think it's London. She's recovering from some sort of breakdown after her father has died, and she's been asked by her family to go to her grandmother's house in North Berwick to caretake and kind of inventory up everything, because the house is going up for sale. And then in the post-war years, we have Ruth, who has just married a man called Peter, who's a widower, and he has 2 young sons. And then further back, like hundreds of years further back, is a woman, or girl really, called Sarah, who has been accused of being a witch. Aren't we all? She is being helped to safety by a family who I get the feeling are kind of outcast from their community anyway. And these 3 storylines, they play out in parallel, but they sometimes touch and sometimes overlap. And what they all have in common is this sense of gothic unease, and of women who have been through some sort of trauma that has led to them having quite unsettled minds, and then most of all, the violence that men perpetuate against women, whether that's like quite overt and physical, or whether it's insidious or psychological. And I don't think I was expecting that going into this book. Wyld has a writing style that I could read loads of. So each storyline has a distinctive voice, but they still feel cohesive together. And I did feel like some of the plot points were a little bit like extreme to the point, nearly the point of cliche or overkill, but I understood the point being made, and so I don't think it annoyed me as much as it might have. I listened to this as an audiobook, and I think that, you know, so it's kind of told with each woman's section, and then before moving on to the next part, there is a standalone chapter relating some sort of violent incident that's happened to different unknown women, and I think I didn't really understand that to begin with. I think it's probably a lot clearer when you see it on the page. So I did find myself getting lost a few times, like wondering what was happening to who. That might have just been me not paying enough attention to the audiobook, and I figured it out eventually. I did think that was a little bit heavy-handed, as I think the main storylines were making the point about toxic masculinity and violence against women well enough, but it's a point that can't really be hammered home too much. So again, it's not really a huge criticism of the book, because I did really love it. And so whilst it was a coincidence that with the Bass Rock I read another book set in Scotland, or about Scotland, the next hello baby, the next was by design. One of my reading challenge prompts, and I can't remember, I think it must have been for around the year. I don't think it matters though, because you know, Pop Sugar, around the year I didn't finish either of them, but one of them was to read a book or books set in, like, or linked by the concept of past, present and future. So I had picked Scotland as my theme. Sorry, so to go deal with the dog. So yeah, so while the People's History was my book for the past, my book for the present, or present-ish, because it's set in 2014, was Two Closes and a Referendum by Mary McCabe. So despite it being like a huge political awakening in Scotland and, you know, further afield, I actually struggled to come across books that included the Scottish referendum, or novels, fiction that included the independence referendum. So this little known book was one of the only options that I had. And so I didn't have particularly high hopes for this one, but thankfully I actually found it quite an entertaining but grounded read, both as an account of the times, but also just as a novel in its own right. So it's told through the experiences of people who live in two different closes in Glasgow. One is in a more affluent area than the other one. And if you don't know, I tried to Google a definition for this, and Google doesn't know either, but a close in, or at least in Glasgow, but I think the whole of Scotland, is like the shared access in a building where there's like flats. So like, you know, your front door, your entranceway, the stairs, the landings, that's the close. Particularly in tenement buildings, which often, or used to, have kind of nice tiles in the closes as well. Anyway, so that means that there's quite a lot of characters in this book, which can get quite confusing, but there is a handy map, so you can look up who is who, and that you can kind of see what I mean by a close. So these characters are on both sides of the debate, both for and against Scottish independence, and we spend more time with certain characters than with others as the days tick by towards the referendum. So I think most of the story is concerned with a couple where they are on either side of the debate. So one of the guys, he's an active, full-time yes activist. He's an active activist. And then his boyfriend, who is a no voter, decides to get involved in, I think it was the Better Together campaign. And also we spend a lot of time with two teenagers, both who have difficult home lives as well. And for me, what I really enjoyed about this book was the characters. That's what made this book for me. They really felt like a realistic cross-section of typical Glaswegians, both those who, you know, they've always lived in the city, they've got deep roots, and those like refugees and asylum seekers who are newly arrived. And for me, actually, I can't think of another book that has a better portrayal of a modern Glasgow, modern Scotland, in terms of the people and the shape of their lives. So I really thought that's really surprised me. It's fun and it's quite a light read, considering some of the topics are quite heavy hitting. And yeah, like much better written than I had feared. It's political without smacking you around the face with it, or at least I felt that. But I think I think I have the same political bias as the author. I think we're both in favour of an independent Scotland, so maybe someone on the other side of the debate wouldn't feel the same as I do. It'd be interesting to see what they thought. And then I left Scotland and headed to an alternative history version of England with another NetGalley. This one was Widowland by C.J. Carey. And you might remember me talking about it at the time, but when I saw the premise of this book, I thought it was going to be like a take on The Man in the High Castle meets The Handmaid's Tale with a heavy dose of 1984. Sorry, this dog is crawling under my tripod now and knocking over my lights. And I thought that could either be genius or a total fucking trash fire. And I was quite relieved to find that it swings more to greatness than it does to just basically ripping off other people's work. So it's set in a Britain that's ruled as a Nazi protectorate after the Second World War. And in this society, women are like in a caste system based on their Aryan qualities, their age, their ability to breed, all that sort of stuff. So Ruth is one of these women, and she is deemed to be kind of a higher caste. I think she's the highest caste, and so she has a job in the Ministry of Culture, rewriting works of literature to bring them more in line with the values of the regime. But something is rumbling. Subversive graffiti keeps appearing on walls, and there's obviously some sort of spark of revolution going on, and this is in the lead up to the Führer's visit to celebrate the long-awaited coronation of the king, because in this universe it's a king, not a queen, that the UK has, and so the powers that be are really on edge about this, and Rose is chosen for a secret mission to infiltrate the Widowlands, which is the name given to the slums where older, lower caste women are kind of banished, because they think that's where this insurgency is coming from, and they want to stamp it out before the Fuhrer arrives. And I just thought this was a fun, page-turny kind of read that had me hooked from beginning to end. Because I loved The Man in the High Castle, I loved The Handmaid's Tale, and I loved 1984. So as a fan of all those, I was really happily surprised to find that this works. I really enjoyed this book, and I hate the term. It kind of makes me feel sick that I'm going to say this, but it is a bit of a romp. Anyway, but then it was back to Scotland for my future book, and this is a future that I hope never happens. It's Richard Drysdale's State of Emergency. So yeah, like I said, I was trying to find novels based around or featuring the independence referendum, and this is one of the very few that I came across. It's not really my usual read. It's not really what I was looking for, but I went with it. It's a fictional version of events. Well, I guess any future facing, any book set in the future would be fictional. I guess future facing was more what I was hoping for, and it's not really, it's kind of like a political espionage story, which isn't really my thing anyway. But in this book, Westminster is attempting to infiltrate the party that's driving the independence movement in Scotland, because they are running scared. And on the eve of the referendum, it looks like a yes vote is a dead cert. And so to stop this happening, Westminster put Scotland under direct rule and try to round up their political opponents. And I think when I picked up this book, I wasn't too sure whether the author would be, what side of the political divide the author would be on, like whether he, this is him playing out fantasies of crushing all the Scots or something. But very quickly it became apparent that Richard Drysdale is very much pro-independence, and, you know, unashamedly writes this story from that bias, which again, fine with me, but it, you know, it'll probably ruffle feathers with other people, particularly as the events in this book are super extreme when it comes to the lengths that Westminster will go to in order to silence its opponents. But I didn't take this book too seriously. It was just a bit of fun. I love the out and out villainy of the no camp of the Westminster people. I just thought it was just fun. There was a like kind of a chase going on, and it was quite exciting. It's, you know, it's no literary groundbreaker, but for those who lived through the referendum of 2014 and are still hoping for independence, it was actually quite a cathartic read. And that brings us into December and my final NetGalley of the year, which was Sarah Gilmartin's Dinner Party. And I found like a lot of really strong Irish authors in the past year or two, and I really do think that Sarah Gilmartin it will be joining those ranks. This is a debut novel, but it makes me really excited about where this writer is going to go. So this is the story of Kate, who is a woman in her 30s, and who her grief over the loss of her twin sister when they were teenagers has kind of shaped her adult life. And so on the anniversary of her sister Elaine's death, she hosts a family dinner party. But things don't go very smoothly, and Kate kind of spins out of control. And whilst that dinner party from the title sets the scene, the book isn't just staged around that dinner. It takes us back to the 90s, to a family that's presided over by really difficult mother who has high demands and a really low tolerance for her children and her husband. And the family story is told in snatches from both before and after the loss of Elaine, until we kind of come to understand what happened to her and what has shaped modern day Kate and fractured the relationships between the family members. This is quite a quiet book. I wouldn't necessarily say it was slow, but it is quiet. Sorry, the dog's knocking things over. Yeah, I wouldn't say it was slow or gentle. I really liked the way of the telling, the build up to Elaine's death and the complex character of their mother, and just how it deals with grief. I found that a really compelling read, and it was painful to see the impact of upbringing and loss on Kate as she entered adulthood. And not just Kate, but on her brothers too. And I think this book really captures well sibling relationships in particular. And I particularly loved the 90s nostalgia of their youth. Yeah, I thought this was a really great book. So as I had been in a reading slump, to bump my reading up for the year to 70 books, I wanted that nice round number for some reason. I finally picked up this short story collection of essays by Zadie Smith, which is Intimations. I do have an actual copy of it, but it's so teeny tiny, I have no idea what I've done with it. I can't find it. It's probably down the back of the sofa somewhere or something. I'd actually bought this in March and finally got around to reading it. And I really want to love Zadie Smith, because like listening to her in interviews, she sounds really cool. She sounds really smart. I know people love her, and this is like the third of her books that I've read, and something just doesn't connect for me when I read her. And I'd heard so much praise for this collection of essays that were all written during like the early part of the outbreak of COVID, the start of the pandemic. I'd heard so much praise for it that I thought, right, this is going to be the book that does it for me. But I actually found it was just okay. Zadie Smith makes some really interesting points in the essays included in this collection, both kind of personal ones and political ones. and her voice definitely comes across as the women that I've heard in interviews much more strongly than it would like in a novel, because these are personal essays. But at the same time, I didn't think there was nothing really profound in any of them. Like, none of the essays were poor, they're all readable, but there was nothing that kind of, I think people have said, oh, this sums up the experience of the pandemic and things like that, and actually I didn't feel that. You know, maybe I've come to this too late, maybe I missed the moment, because we are, Jesus, about to enter year 3 of coronavirus. Maybe if I'd read it in a more timely way, it would have hit home more, who knows. But my last read of the year, and it was almost like I was goading my reading slump, because I picked up this beast, A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. And like I've said before, not a fan of big books. For a start, they terrify me, but also because I sometimes think they are unnecessarily large, and that the same story could be told in just as impactful, maybe even better way with less pages. Plus, I'm impatient. Like, there are so many books and I have no time. Why would I want to spend more than 500 pages with any one character or set of characters? Like, get on with it, tell the story, let's go. But you know, sometimes there are exceptions to that. So like, I've got a shelf here of quite big books, and I enjoyed all of them. So sometimes, you know, doorstopper size is justified, and I think with this book that is the case. So I think everyone probably knows what this is about, but in case you were like me and hadn't really paid much attention, this is about 4 friends who all meet in college, but mostly it's the story of one of them, a man named Jude St. Francis. He has a physical disability, and he also has quite a past shaped by trauma and abuse that he doesn't like to talk about. He's a great friend. He becomes a brilliant lawyer, but he has like sub-zero self-esteem, and that colors his life in basically just shades of grey, despite the love and support that comes from the people around him. So it's a coming of age story, it's a love story, it's a found family story, it is heartbreaking, misery lit, which still manages to be touching, affirming, and just gorgeous. I'm not a big crier with books, although I often, you know, that doesn't mean to say that I don't get touched deeply by books, but I don't often cry. But I will admit, there's a certain passage in this book, and even just thinking about it now just makes me feel a bit teary. If you've read it, it's where it talks about X always equals X, and it had me sobbing myself to sleep. Jude's lack of self-esteem it's really upsetting to read about, because as is the case with many people who see themselves as having no worth, they see themselves so negatively. With Jude, it's unjustified, and the love of the people around him, despite him not always being easy to love, it's beautiful to read. And you know, even though he has these feelings towards himself, he still has that capacity to appreciate and reciprocate that love as well. And I think that's what ultimately really touched me about this book. I wasn't expecting to like it as much as I did, but yeah, sometimes big books are worth the payoff. So I think I scared my reading slump off with this one, because I seem to have got my reading mojo back. But this this video has been long enough, so I will keep my most recent reads, my January reads, funnily enough, to my January wrap up, because I think 10 books in one go is enough for anyone. As usual, have you read any of those books? What are your thoughts? Did you like them? What is your thought on doorstopper books? Do you love them? Do you hate them? Do you just use them to stop your door? Let me know in the comments below, and until next time, bye. Yummy or nummy? No.